Discovering who we are isn't the end of our journey, because there's always more to discover. But although some lie in our future, some also lie in our past, waiting to be rediscovered. Before we began our journey of self-discovery, whether in human evolution or ourselves, we made discoveries we didn't realize. And even though deep down we knew who we were, we didn't understand these discoveries and didn't accept change. So they remained metaphorically unearthed. For you, this is pretty self-explanatory. But for the study of human evolution, this goes back hundreds of years to when even the research community was resistant to the idea of human evolution. Which is funny, because evolution in itself is change. So the research community wasn't ready to accept the change of change itself. Even when we had previously unearthed a hominin cousin of ours, the Neanderthals. It took time before researchers accepted human evolution. So therefore, the Neanderthals also lay metaphorically unearthed. But this is okay, because by learning how human evolution was accepted with the Neanderthals, we can learn that when we eventually make our first big discovery and accept change, we won't just discover ourselves, but rediscover ourselves. Before Charles Darwin published On the Origin of Species in 1859, our understanding of the natural world and our place within it was vastly different from what we know today. The most commonly held belief was that organisms were made as they appeared by God, with humans only below literal angels. This was supported by researchers such as Linnaeus with his Systema naturae, which was a classification of all life, both physical and metaphysical. Even though the seed for the tree of life had been planted, even when researchers were discovering possible evidence of human evolution, some hesitated to publish their findings out of fear of the community's response, and others just didn't accept it. However, the problem really arose when the first ever hominin fossils were being discovered and examined. But due to the resistance to human evolution, they were wrongfully analyzed and interpreted. In 1829, the first ever hominin fossils were discovered in Belgium by Philippe Charles Schimmerling. One partial Neanderthal skull, along with other artifacts and remains, called Angus II. It appeared smaller and older than modern human skulls, but Schimmerling was afraid of losing his credibility and his career if he published it. So he barely mentioned the Neanderthal skull, only briefly saying they were from the time before Noah's flood. He, however, used its small skull size to infer that it was a human of limited intellectual faculty and low level of civilization. Next, in 1848, the second ever hominin fossil was discovered in Gibraltar, a British overseas territory, by Lieutenant Edmund Flint, and by accident. It's called Gibraltar I, and its skull was nearly complete, being able to see its face and most of its cranium. However, because it was discovered by soldiers and not by researchers, there was no additional geological evidence with it. This, combined with not accepting human evolution as true yet, resulted in the Gibraltar Scientific Society dismissing it. Then, in 1856, quarry workers discovered several fossils in the Neander Valley in Germany, known today as Neanderthal man. They found fragments of ribs, pelvis, femurs, lower arm bones, clavicle, and scapula. But most importantly, a fragment of a skull. It was just the top of the skull, but it had one very distinct feature: big protruding arches over the eye sockets that were clearly not present in modern-day humans. When examined by researchers, they came up with a slew of conclusions that we now know today were wrong and misinformed, and none of which suggested that this was a new species. Some said it was an inferior human that inhabited Europe before modern humans. Others said that it was a human that suffered from a severe disease. And some even said that this person had an injury that made them frown so much that it gave them brow ridges. However, these claims weren't enough to combat the clear evidence that the Neanderthal man was not human, and was the first known ancient species of the genus Homo neanderthalensis. Soon after, in 1859, Darwin published On the Origin of Species, which finally allowed both researchers and the public to accept the idea of human evolution. This began the rediscovery of those metaphorically unearthed fossils. For Angus too, analyses beginning in the 2010s revealed that the skull was dated to be around 30,000 years old. It belonged to a juvenile of age 4 to 6. And now, Philippe Charles Schimmerling is credited with being the first person to ever make a paleobiological discovery. For Gibraltar 1, analyses beginning in the 1870s revealed that the skull was dated to be 70 to 45,000 years old. It belonged to a woman, and now the British Association for the Advancement of Science recognizes it as a Neanderthal. We often know deep down who we are, but are afraid to change because it conflicts so much with who we are now. And that's okay, because everyone does at some point, even the earliest human evolutionary researchers. But they too learned how to accept human evolution and therefore change. And hopefully, by learning how human evolution and the Neanderthals went through their own discovery and rediscovery, you can understand that when we make our first big self-discovery and finally accept change, we won't just discover ourselves, but rediscover ourselves.